everyone. I'm Max Kozak, project manager here at Red Hat. Standing next to me is Austin Dewey, consultant here at Red Hat. And today we'll be focusing on our best practices for CI/CD on OpenShift using Jenkins. For those of you who don't know what CI/CD is, it's continuous integration, continuous delivery, which helps build, test, and deploy your applications. And Jenkins is a tool that leverages CI/CD. That said, Austin, what's our first best practice?
Thanks a lot, Max. So I'm looking at your diagram here for your upcoming CI/CD implementation, and looks like here you've got a Jenkins master, a couple Jenkins slaves here. You've got a Git repo here in your cluster with maybe some shared artifacts, it looks like, and you've got a couple dev and prod projects. So Max, my question for you, if you don't mind me asking, how are you planning on standing all this up? Is it going to be a hands-on keyboard? Is it going to be an Ansible playbook? What's your strategy here?
Yeah, it's all hands-on keyboard manual. I'm not even aware of an Ansible playbook we could have done.
So definitely admire your perseverance, Max. But I think what would have made this a lot easier for you is if you would have created an Ansible playbook, or maybe even something like a Bash script that could have stood all of this up automatically. Because guess what? You're not always going to be the guy to stand all this up within your organization. It might be somebody else. But ideally, we want to see the same layout, the same infrastructure in every implementation of this. The best way to do that is through automation.
Wow, I wish I would have known that before I started. But hey, listen, looking at my diagram, you mentioned the Jenkins master, right? How do we automate that?
Yeah, so the Jenkins master, what we see all the time out in the field is that teams will go in, hands-on keyboard, they'll configure the Jenkins master. This is a little bit slower, it's a little bit more error-prone than being able to actually automate this. So we can actually use OpenShift to our advantage here. If we drop in a build config of type Jenkins pipeline, the Jenkins master will be listening in on your OpenShift project, and it will see, hey, we have a new build config, it's a Jenkins pipeline, I'm going to configure this, and I don't need any human to go in and configure this manually. The same thing can be done with the Jenkins slave. If we drop in an image stream with an annotation role Jenkins slave, as long as that image stream is pointing somewhere, we can easily pull that image, or as long as that image exists within the internal registry, Jenkins will again say, hey, we have an image stream, I'm going to create a new Jenkins slave based on this image stream, and I don't need anybody to actually go in and configure this manually.
That's great stuff. So Austin, also I just wanted to ask, so looking at the Git part of it, right? So I have my developers, I want them to code and focus on getting things to production. Is your idea here getting a shared pipeline with the common artifacts? What's the goal here?
That's a good question. So in your blueprint here, like I said, you have a Git server in your OCP cluster. What you should be using that Git server for is for a CI/CD team to maintain common CI/CD artifacts. We don't want dev teams to be reinventing the wheel here, creating pipelines from scratch when we can be using maintained artifacts to build our pipelines.
So let's talk about this one, right? So I want to talk about the dev and prod projects. Like, I want my developers focusing on just making one or two. Currently, we're making hundreds of these. Like, how do we do this better?
Sure. So first, just a comment. It looks like you've got your dev and prod projects in the same cluster. That's fine. What we also see is that teams prefer to have separate dev, test, and prod clusters that their deployments will live, so that's not all in the same OCP cluster. What we also see with this as a consequence is we see lots of different pipelines that essentially do the same thing. One pipeline to build and deploy one image to dev, another one to build and deploy a certain image to prod. Lots of different pipelines when in fact we could have one or few pipelines that take in a set of parameters and can intelligently decide which image are we building and where is this image going. That'll make maintenance a lot easier because we'll have few pipelines as opposed to many.
Austin, this is amazing. So how does someone actually get started to implement all this?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, Max. And to get started implementing some of these best practices that we talked about, you can go to redhat.com/services to learn more about how our consulting services can help you, or you can talk to your existing Red Hat account executive to start a conversation. Thank you.